and welcome to the talk, The Challenges of Onboarding People with Zero Cloud Foundry Experience, a newcomer's point of view, or how I like to call it, why the hell didn't I choose a shorter title? In the next few minutes, I will be talking not from the perspective of an HR expert, nor a really technological point of view, rather from my perspective as a newcomer and the challenges I faced during my onboarding and the challenges I still face to this day. My name is Martín Valencia Flores. I am a platform engineer here at anynines for almost 2 years now. On my spare time, I like to play role-playing games, tabletop games. I'm currently a dungeon master, playing 2 different campaigns of Dungeons and Dragons. Sometimes I regret that. And this is my second time actually in the Cloud Foundry Summit, but it's my first solo talk, so please bear with me. So, newcomers, untapped potential. Notice that I don't say unlimited, just untapped. The virtues of a newcomer. Zero experience is a double-edged sword. What I mean by this is, for the positive side, you get someone that, even though it has a clean slate, they have, therefore, no biases, no preconceptions. They also have a view, kind of like a kid at a new toy store. Everything is bright and shiny, so it's easy to get an outside-the-box perspective. On the other side, due to that clean slate, they require a bit more training on your side, and due to that, they are also a bit susceptible to what be your biases. You grow alongside the newcomer. First of all, you can dust off knowledge. Those edge cases that are a bit rare but still important, well, you can use them as practice. That way, the newcomer learns important material and you get to practice those, so to say, rare occasions that pop up every now and then when developing. Also, a newcomer is a more or less good indicator on the quality of your documentation. Let's say the documentation should be more or less self-explanatory. So if someone with zero experience on whatever you're onboarding them gets it, then the documentation is doing a good job. Well, maybe the newcomer is quite smart and gets it anyway, but can help point out how to simplify it, but not dumb it down. Keeping up with the topic of growth, the senior or mentor grows alongside them. They get exposed to probably new ways of thinking, new ways of working around. They may be able to correct some deep or forgotten misconceptions while actually teaching the newcomer. And most importantly, you build up the interpersonal skills between both sides of the onboarding process, which is really, really important for good teamwork. As I mentioned in my first talk in the Cloud Foundry Summit, progress does not imply starting from a clean slate. Progress is built upon strong foundations, and I still stand by it. In this case, you have to be that strong foundation. Onboarding. Onboarding is a challenge by itself. It's a complicated process. It comes with a set of potential challenges from the technical background of the person you're onboarding, the process that you're being onboarded to, or the company itself. This coupled also with the historical background to what you want to onboard people. You perhaps don't want them to know the story of each of the CEOs that was in your company, but you want them to know a little bit about it to live the culture and be comfortable where they work. Same with the tools. You need to know a bit of history about how the tools were developed in order to use them properly. And this, coupled with the technological background, brings a complexity, which can be summarized the most important ones to, again, the tools you're using and the product itself. You have to find a balance to properly convey the complexity of both those components, but leave it accessible enough so that the person that has zero experience in this field can do it step by step and get familiar with what they're supposed to work with. Entering the cloud ecosystem. Entering the cloud ecosystem was a bit scary, as you can see. To me, it was a giant behemoth that I had to tackle now. And I was just a little person that had no knowledge beyond a few articles that I read in order to keep up with the changes in technology. It did bring, though, a change in outlook. The first, or the most important one for me, was deployment. I used to work as an in-house developer, and the deployment was more onto the manual side, so it was machine by machine. So this is why I mean by you go from one by one to one and done. It's not that magical, but it's the simplest way I can explain that change in outlook that it brought me. One of the advantages of the cloud ecosystem is you can focus on what matters. And what matters here is your code base and what kind of provider will fit your needs for the infrastructure that you're going to use. And best practices. I remember starting reading the 12-factor app and the 12-factor manifesto. And the first read, it just made a lot of sense. And the more I started to read it, the more I recognized some of the practices were already ingrained in me by either professors from the university or former colleagues in my old job. So it was welcoming to see that best practices are kept even when you change environment entirely. Cloud ecosystem does bring, again, its own set of challenges. The foremost for me was security and compliance is taken to a whole new level. Obviously, someone working in software always has to be aware of security and compliance norms. But with the availability of information, because it's on the cloud, it takes it to a whole different game. So it was both really intimidating, but also quite calming and, again, welcoming, because it was very well defined. So it was something that was already being taken care of. With great power comes great responsibility.
With great power comes great responsibility.
Meaning that you go from being part of the development cycle, like you develop, you test, you're done, to being part of the whole cycle of continuous development and deployment. So DevOps, do you have them? So the development operation practices and experts on it become really important for your day-to-day business. And one of the challenge and advantage at the same time for cloud ecosystems, everything is on the cloud. So you now depend on a good connection. Now, Cloud Foundry, quite the adaptable toolset. Why Cloud Foundry? Well, first of all, Cloud Foundry is an industry standard platform, and standards are good, standards are cool. It simplifies the overview on the technology stack. So as I mentioned before, you just worry on your app, your data, and more or less you're done. And my favorite part, it's open source code. So it's not just a brand, it's a community. And that sense of community, it really goes a long way. Further boons of Cloud Foundry is tied to the fact that it's a strong community. They have really accessible documentation. So basically, if you're looking for something, you'll probably find it. If you cannot find it, they have a healthy community. So maybe someone in the community can point you to the correct place or give you a hint. And worst case scenario, the CLI they have is quite user-friendly. So straightforward, you will probably find that on your own. Now, to my experience, an ongoing process. Really, an ongoing process. Here, let's choose a character. And I say choose a character, but not really. There's only one character, and it's me. Me, 2 years ago, I had some skills, some equipment, a notepad, a coffee mug. I knew some tech support. I know Spanish and English. But I didn't know much about cloud technologies yet. So at the beginning of my adventure, I just met my colleagues, got used to the company's culture. I got introduced to the different processes here. I had multiple pair-ups, which I am still really grateful for, because a lot of my coworkers were and still are really good mentors. And I went from exercises to real-life tickets, real-life projects. So, regarding that process, ni mucho ni poco, or just the right amount. As you can see, I saw this as a map or a quest. So first I was introduced to the Cloud Foundry API and CLI. Then how to manage apps, how to get the logs. Now that you have the apps and the logs down, you have to mess with the environment. Okay, you have the environment more or less figured out. Here are your services. These belong to a certain space. Now you have to manage your routes and domains, so on and so forth, and then boom, here's a real task. So it was a gradual build-up that I truly never felt alone. So it was quite the adventure, I would say. But what is an adventure without, a few mishaps, or in my case, running hardly into walls, even though the door was just there. The ones I remember the most is something wasn't running, and by default, I would check my code over and over and over because of my old habits as a developer outside of the cloud environment. But I took with me that if the code isn't working, yeah, sure, check your code. And if it works, then check your dependencies. And if it isn't your dependencies, you're probably outside of your organization's quota or something a bit more strange. Something that I always like to draw a parallel with is that your dependencies were your libraries in my own environment. Perhaps not one-to-one, but it was the closest thing I could say to myself so I could follow a certain process. Another one was restarting or restaging, which at the beginning it sounded a bit confusing, but I just nailed it down to the following. If you are binding a service or something of the like, maybe you just need to restart. But if you're changing the environment, then you might require a restage because it's a bigger thing. And the most painful one, keep your deployments to the correct space, because perhaps you're trying to test something in the demo stage and you don't realize you pushed it into one of the production stage. Well, it didn't happen like that. It was more like testing stage and demo stage, but you get the idea. And as I said, it is an ongoing process, and truly with all kinds of knowledge-based jobs, even with just manual ones, the road never ends. There's always something new to learn. You can learn the basics by heart, and yet you will still be surprised on what else you have missed. The more you know about the tool, the more uses you can creatively think for it. For example, you might be really good with a screwdriver, and you might be able to use it as a chisel, even though it shouldn't be used as a chisel, but you know how to. You might avoid it just for good practices, though. Let's see our character again, the adventure right now. As you can see, not much has changed, except probably a haircut, more beard. My class changed from a normal computer engineer to a cloud platform engineer. My age changed as well, 2 years. Now in my equipment, it's still the basic, my notepad and my coffee, but also I carry with me the 12-factor apps manifesto. It's quite useful. And my skills expanded a bit. Now I'm able to do talks in the Cloud Foundry Summit. And it's still ongoing, but the cloud platform and cloud technologies are listed there. In summary, what I learned so far from this process. The learnings I take with me are the following. Keep the didactic material simple and straightforward. Cheat sheets are your friends. Don't coddle, neither throw straight to the lions your newcomers. We are adults, yes, but we are not robots. So a bit of guidance and a bit of understanding goes a long way. Ensure the availability of a mentor. I cannot stress enough how much my coworkers help me with that sense. And if not, at the very least, have a really good documentation at the ready, because the newcomer is really going to need it. And perhaps something obvious, but that also gets overlooked a lot, is keep the onboarding focused to a certain set of skills. If you're onboarding someone and they like being in the company and they plan to be there for a while, you will have time down the road to try to push them through other skills, or they would themselves will say, this would benefit me and the company. Let me try to learn this. So keep a pace, keep it steady, but keep it focused. On a final note, keep in mind that due to the magnitude of what the cloud ecosystem represents, it might be that you are not finding people to onboard, not because it's your fault, but because it seems so scary to change or to enter into this environment. But to those that are newcomers, like I was scared myself, and it was worth it. Like, yeah, I'm not saying don't be scared, but don't be that scared. And for people in HR or upper management that are watching this, perhaps this talk was a bit more aimed to the fact that you have a certain set of expectations or an idea of the process. This talk was meant to give you the perspective of someone that entered with a certain circumstance. And who knows, perhaps you will benefit from taking inspiration from things that you might have overlooked or forgotten about because of the experience that your company has built on. Well, if you made it all the way to the end, I would like to thank you for your time and attention. There will be a 5-minute Q&A after the talk, so feel free to join us if your question wasn't answered in the chat previously. And hope to see you there. Bye. First, I would like to address one of the questions that was in the chat. I misclicked and it said that it was already answered in live, but it wasn't. Is how much time would you recommend to plan for an onboarding of a new engineer to become a cloud engineer? That is a tricky question. A couple of weeks at the very least. As I said, it's an ongoing process. So it depends on how much you want to show them, how much you want to let them be able to do. But 3 to 4 weeks should yield you a really solid beginner, so to speak. Hi, Patrick. Thanks. Any further questions or comments? Oh, there is one. My favorite experience was the team building, talking with my coworkers, getting to know the structure of the company, getting to know the culture of the company. But the one that I like least definitely is the amount of documents one has to read and sign to get the ball rolling. I mean, it's not that I hate it, it's more that it's still bureaucracy in the end. But yeah, it's not that relevant compared to the good parts, I would say. Any further questions? Or if you cannot think of one, but have a question later, I will be around in our booth, so I can be reached there as well. Okay, I answered those two. Oh, here's another one. Any recommendations of the... Okay, I'll go by... Are there any language or framework-specific observations you would... Framework-specific observations. I would say not really framework-specific. In terms of onboarding, I found that rather than going through frameworks or languages, going through a process first and then going a bit deeper, it's a bit more effective, especially if the person being onboarded has some knowledge on either languages, type of framework. The knowledge is not lost, the ability is still transferred from one place to the other.
in terms of environment, I would say. And the next question, any recommendations on how we could make the expectations for the onboarding focus to talk about it more transparent? Actually, yes, a roadmap is quite useful. I mean, yes, it sounds still like school, but having a bit of structure, but not being an ironclad structure, more like a bit flexible and allowing some feedback in the moment is always good for that kind of focusing, because you reach an agreement between what the company needs and what the person being onboarding needs, which is a bit it's similar to the approach I took during my onboarding with my colleagues. It served me well, I would say.